So first of all, we're I think really lucky to have a really exciting panel of people, incredibly high achievers. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves in a couple of minutes. But what I might do as a start is maybe just give an outline of what the panel are going to talk about and why it's important. And also I'd like to talk a little bit about the rationale behind the choice of the four people that you have in front of you. So first of all, the reason that we're focusing on sports, we talk a lot about the use of technology in every industry, in every work environment. And we talk about how technology transforms every industry and every work environment. But probably sports is one of the ones where it's more acutely visible and acutely important. So first of all, we see a lot about the role of technology transforming sport and being the key difference between winning and losing. We talk about time management and productivity and so on. But in sports, seconds or a second can be the difference between huge success and legendary status and going home without any recognition. So those marginal gains that are maybe important in other industries and sometimes not so important in industries, in sports tend to be the big difference between achieving the goal and not achieving the goal. The second thing is sports is probably the most metricized industry in the world in terms of, when you look at any sporting activity, you can watch it back from every different possible angle, use all different technologies to evaluate and analyze it. And again, you can replay things down into very fine seconds. So it's incredibly metricized, and technology obviously is key to doing that. So that's the reason that we're looking at sport. If we can look at an industry like sport and the role that technology plays in that, we're going to ask, are there lessons we can learn from the use of tech in sport that can then be applied back into other industries and other domains? So everyone that goes back into your day jobs, what is it that we might be able to learn from sport that we can apply and do differently tomorrow? So then a little couple of minutes on why we've picked the four people that we have. The original idea behind doing this was something chatting with Peter in the middle, and we talked about the kind of profile of people that we wanted. And first thing Peter said was Peter wanted to make sure he was on it. And as it happens, he happened to fulfill the criteria anyway. But okay, so obviously across all four people, when they introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their own sporting achievements and career, it's very clear they're all incredibly high achievers in each of their respective areas. So that was one very obvious one. The second thing is that they've all managed people, and that either in a professional, as in their main responsibility was to coach or to manage, or they've taken that on in a voluntary status. And I know that actually across all four, many in their, each in their own day-to-day jobs involve coaching and managing people, but also they do an awful lot of voluntary work and helping to develop younger people and people of all fitness abilities to do well and to get into exercise and get into sports. So that was a big reason. And a third reason is actually just the four personalities involved are ones that I think are quite reflective. And there are some people that buy into a particular routine or a particular technology and become almost obsessed and don't see anything else, only that technology and how good that is. Whereas I think all four people here, through knowing them to varying degrees over the years, all are very reflective and think about what they're doing rather than just assuming that they are doing the right thing. And the final reason then for picking them is actually away from sport altogether. In their day jobs, they're all running some kind of business or managing some kind of team. Either Yvonne and Jane Ann, who both have their own businesses. Peter has actually moved from Vodafone and is in HubSpot starting this week. And Ferguss, who's leading high performance teams here in NUI Galway. So again, the reason that's important is, while it's important to learn a lot from them about sport, one of the things we want to achieve today is taking those lessons from sport and applying them back to each of our day jobs, which may or may not be sports related. So it was important to have four people that had experience of running a business or managing a team that's not necessarily just directly about their own running or rowing and so on. So on that note, I think I might leave my introduction at that, and I'd like each of the group to maybe just spend a few minutes talking about themselves. Obviously, I know they're all modest people, but talking about your achievements, but also about maybe your journey and the highs and lows that you've had in your own sporting career. And we might start with Ferguss as the first.
Thanks, Kieran. Thanks for having me. I suppose first, look, thanks for the kind comments and saying that we're high achievers. I mean, I would imagine everyone in the room is pretty much a high achiever. I'm currently in second year of year course, and I know people look up to sports people and think sports people do great things. But when I sit in my class and I see the achievements that my classmates, have done in business, I also think that's quite amazing. We just all have a different path that we go down, and the fact that we may excel in sport, it doesn't necessarily mean, that your business excelling is any different to our sport excelling. So anyway, I'm second year in MBA, so hopefully I'll meet you all after Christmas for some modules. I look forward to that. My original background was in Gaelic sports. I'm from Limerick, and I played with a club called Lahan in Limerick, hurling and football. And while I was there, I had a coach who was brilliant. He was, like, in my opinion, way ahead of his time. His attitude was, feel free to do whatever you want. He didn't constrain us in any way. Just feel free to do what you want, express yourself. And because of that, we were quite successful. And that he was the first person, and even though I was only about 14, 15, he gave me the love of coaching. Soon after, around the same age, 14, 15, a rowing club opened up in my local town. Two people from Limerick City moved to where I was, where we have a lovely stretch of water, and they opened up a boat club. I'd never heard of rowing before, didn't know anything about it, but myself and some friends said we would give it a go. And I pretty much loved it instantly, and that was, hurling pretty much put to the side. I played rugby at school, that was put to the side. And even though I was more successful at rugby and I'm more successful at hurling, I just loved the rowing. As a junior, I literally won nothing, but I loved it. I loved the team part of it and the individual aspect. I loved that it brought the best of both worlds together. So when I finished school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I really struggled with my career. I have no idea what I wanted to do. I started off with construction studies when I left school, ended up moving to London for 2 years, where I worked for a building company as a quantity surveyor, and it wasn't really for me. And I came back home, and at 20 my rowing now started to happen for me. Okay, and at 21 I made the national squad. And then, so I spent 6 years with the national squad. I went to 3 World Rowing Championships. Unfortunately, I didn't make the Olympics. I did try, but I was close, but didn't make it. But while doing that, I was always asking questions. Why do we do this? Why do we do that? We used to, rowing is really, for technology now, rowing is, when it comes to labs and physiological testing, lactate profiles, all this stuff, it's far ahead of a lot of sports was at the time. And I had a million questions, which led me into doing a sports science degree. So at 26, I went to UL and I did a sports science degree. And luckily enough then, as a mature student, I had a little bit more maturity coming out with my degree, and rugby was just turning professional. And I did a year with the National Coaching and Training Centre in Limerick at the time. It's now Coaching Ireland and Sport Ireland and the Institute. They've kind of 3 sections now. I did a year with them, and then Munster Rugby were looking for a strength and conditioning coach. And I heard, and I rang up a guy that was 2 years ahead of me in school, and he was one of the coaches with the Irish team, Philip Danaher. And I said, Philip, can you get me an interview with Declan Kidney? He's coach of Munster. So he got me, before they even advertised, it wouldn't happen now, but they didn't advertise. I persuaded him to give me the job. That was May 99. I spent 20 years at Munster Rugby. I spent 9 years, my first 9 years were with the professional team. So I was really lucky, for any of you rugby followers out there, that I was with them when they won the European Cup on 2 occasions, and we had 2 occasions where we lost. But it was a great experience. And through all that time, well, like when I started, there was no technology, really. Well, there was, but not in our setting. The video analysis was Declan and his assistant coach Niall with VCR, fast forward, rewind, writing down on the clock what time on the clock is the clip that he wants to show the players, you know, and being able to fast forward and on the clock to the next clip. So over my time, it's completely changed. And now you can literally sit down to a computer and you can say, I want to see everything I did in the game, I don't want to see anything else, and I only want to see the things I did in the game that were involved in scrums. And the computer will just dish it out to me and I'll see my 30 or 40 seconds of what's going on. And then I spent time with the academy and I spent time with the age grade. So I spent time across all parts of Munster Rugby. And during that time I went to the World Cup with the Irish 7-a-side team in 2009. I spent 2 years working with them. And all the time in the middle I did stuff with GA clubs, I did stuff with Tipperary and Offaly and Galway, but just in and out helping people, friends of mine that were the strength and conditioners and helping them in different areas. And then, so I know there's a lot here, sorry. I gave up my rowing at some stage because I had to get on with my career. There's no money in rowing. You know, I'm sure you all know Fiona well now at this stage. You know, there is no money in it, which is why she's here doing an MBA. So I gave up my rowing, but I still wanted to train, so I started doing Ironmans, and that's when I started using Garmin's and these things to track what I was doing, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. So I did a few Ironmans, and then I got fed up with Ironmans and the whole, what's your bike like, and what's my bike like, and all this stuff. And so I started doing multi-day running, which is a little bit more pure, you just go for a run. So I completed the most famous one of all is the Marathon des Sables, which I completed in 2016, and 2 years later I did a similar one in Iceland called Fire and Ice. And the conditions in Iceland were much, much more favourable to an Irish person, and I did much better. But again, key to that, which we'll talk about, was this thing, was the Garmin. And then 2.5 years ago, I was looking for a change. I was kind of getting brown, getting stale in Munster Rugby, and 20 years I needed a change. They were looking for somebody here to look after scholarships in high-performance sports, and I know very well Mike Heskin, who's the director of sport, and we had a chat, and I applied, and I got the job, and then COVID came, and so I did like 6 months, 9 months maybe, and COVID comes along, and everything is up in the air. But luckily then for me, Tokyo got cancelled, and they extended, and they had a lot of extra work to do because of COVID and all. So then Rowing Ireland approached me and asked me would I do the team manager job for the Tokyo Olympics. So I took the hand last February. So I did from February straight through till 1st of August when we came home from Tokyo. I did team manager job for the rowing. So I worked with Fiona quite closely, and my job for that was to make sure that all the COVID stuff, all the flights, hotels, anything that they needed outside of what they're doing on the water, that was there for them. And that's kind of where I am now.
Is that all?
That's
it.
Excellent. Well, thanks, because I probably only have about 2 minutes, really. I have a much shorter, condensed career, really, and my story is probably somebody who got into athletics very, very late in life. So I did my first cross-country race when I was about 34. First track and field when I was 34. But I was lucky to kind of experiment and fail fast and figure out which race was the best for me, you know. So probably my favourite story of adversity and failure is going to my first national Masters track and field championships, All Ireland, including Northern Ireland, and I ran in the 200 metres early on in the day and the 1500 metres later in the day, and I came last in the 200, and I was like, oh, that imposter syndrome was real. That wasn't just in my mind. I shouldn't have been in there. And then but at the time I really remember my teammates kind of rallying around me and going, oh, don't worry about it, you know, it's fine. I was like, oh, I shouldn't be here, I should go home. I said, no, do the 15. So I did the 15, and I managed to just win it by a hair. Photo finish, and then from there, that was 2009, I ended up winning the title about 5 times over a 6-year period, and going over to Brazil in 2013 for the World Masters Championships, getting into the finals, coming 5th, and then at the same time I was having a good cross-country career, in that I was making the Irish Masters teams and running the 5 Nations, and I was very lucky to be in this really great over 35s team, and over 6 years we got like 5 gold medals and 1 silver. My journey there was just barely getting onto the team in 2009. Kind of like I was like the second sub, and I got the call, and then in 2013 I led the team to gold in Cardiff 2 weeks after coming back from Brazil. So I had a fairly condensed late start, and I think what I discovered in sport was that it's failing fast is good, but failing is probably just part and parcel of it, and the feedback that you get is instant. It's like you were last, or you were first. And sometimes I find in business, feedback might be very some scary word, and you feel very unsafe sometimes when you're getting feedback or delivering feedback. Whereas in sport, it's natural and it's constructive. So I think that's probably one of the bigger lessons that I try to learn. I try to kind of look on failure and feedback as a real useful gift, part of the process. So in terms of get involved in sports, I've 3 years chairperson of the local triathlon club. So I do a lot of kind of helping out with the running and coaching, and that's because my kids go to that club, and I'm trying to give back and I suppose help out in that sense. But nothing like there's no Olympics in the equation. Probably as Kieran mentioned, I'm here because it was my idea, but also it's that interaction between I love thinking about sport and what we can learn from it, and not taking anything away from team sports. And rowing is probably somewhere between a team sport and individual sport, and rugby is pure team sport. I find it's interesting to see what we can learn from the analytics. I have a similar watch. The analytics that we get from, and the lessons that we get from running and from triathlon, that can be adapted to the corporate athlete, which is me too in parallel, because I'm I think I'm one of you. I was here doing the masters, not the MBA, but another masters with Kieran a number of years ago, and I work in the corporate world. And I just think there's great lessons that can be learned from the endurance athlete who has to train 35 hours to 40 hours a week for most of the weeks of the year, bar 4, and has to kind of learn some coping strategies, particularly if they have a long career or they get into sport late in life. Some of those careers might last 20 years. So there's a lot of parallels there, and I'm always interested to see what more can we learn from the endurance athlete. So that's my tuppence worth.
Brilliant. Yvonne?
Well, I'm kind of the opposite to Peter. I've been told I came out holding a ball. So I started off, I'm from down the country in Galway, Currafin, which, as anyone who knows Galway will know, it's a huge footballing place to be from. So my first sport was actually Gaelic football, and basketball was massive as well down there. So I was the only girl on the boys' team at the time. There was no girls' team, we only had a few girls in the class. So I decided I wanted to play, and I was going to play with the boys, and that's what I did. I also used to do quite a lot of athletics. My mum was telling me a story when I was only 5 years old. She said we went to one of the community games, and I decided I would enter every single event. Every single event. So I did, and she said, I came to about my 9th or 10th event, and I think it was a 200 metre sprint and this was after a day of doing, I did 100 metre, I did a 1500, I did long jumps, I did everything. And I came second, and I bawled my eyes out crying. And Mum decided right then and there she had to teach me a lesson, and that if I was going to be that bad about losing, that she'd never let me play sport again. So she decided that it wasn't good, healthy for a child to be that competitive, which is probably right. But so still kept up the athletics. We moved to the city when I was 12. Now I ended up going to St. Inda's, which at the time was an all-boys school. Loving sport, going to an all-boys school was the best thing for me because we got to do every sport going. So that's where I started playing soccer. Went on to play with Salt Hill Devon at the time. I was still playing Gaelic, still playing basketball. It was the first time Salt Hill Devon had a girls' team, and I was lucky enough at the time. We won pretty much everything all around us. We had actually Claire Malloy on the team, we'd Maeve de Burke on the team, we'd Niamh Fahy on the team, we'd Ruth Fahy on the team. So you've got 4 Irish internationals there who are just phenomenal athletes, even back then at under 16 level. So we'd a fantastic soccer team. Then when I was 15, a woman came into the school, and she decided she was doing PE, and she took us for a couple of rugby classes. Now all of my family, the elder generation, were all rugby players, whereas all of my generation were Gaelic footballers. She came in and she's like, "You look strong, you're tall, you're fast, come play rugby." So I was like, okay, happy days, I love it. My dad used to bring me to games all the time. Like, he brought me to games from when I was a couple of months old. So I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun, show me where to go. So I went out and joined Corinthians at only 15, straight on the senior team. Very little child welfare back then. So I actually ended up, talking of failures and you're saying the lows, I ended up hurting my back when I was only 16, which had me out for quite a while. Gained some weight from that, but came back, told I'd be lucky to walk again. And I thought, well, I'm going to play rugby again, never mind walk. Came back from that, and a couple of years later got a call up for Connacht. Then another year or so after that, I got the call up for the Irish team. At the time I was over in the UK, I wanted to do sports science. I got into Galway, got accepted into Galway, but unknown to my mother at the time, I'd applied to the UK. I'd saved up money because you have to pay to apply to some of the colleges over there. And I came home after I got my results and bounded into her and went, I'm off to London. So I'm like, and Mum's like, no, you're not doing sports. I was like, I'm doing sports, that's what I want to do. So I buggered off to London. Back then there wasn't a huge amount of money in women's sports. There's still not a huge amount, but even less back then. So we actually had to pay for our own flights home for training. So it was a pretty intensive schedule. So I was playing with the university, I was playing with a club over there. I was still playing club rugby when I came home here, playing provincial rugby and playing Irish rugby. But how they used to train for both the province and Ireland at the time would be 2 blocks of 8-hour days each. And I'm in full intensity, 100% for 2 full days of training. So I'd fly back then on the Monday, straight out to training over there Monday night. So at that point I had to choose a sport, which rugby I just loved the physicality of it. So rugby became my first love. So rugby was the sport I went with. We playing in the Six Nations, and foot and mouth hit at the time. So on the weekend, it was Paddy's weekend in 2001, we were meant to be playing England, but because foot and mouth had hit, we couldn't fly over to the UK. And it was in the session that weekend I ended up doing a lot of damage to my knee that I'd never quite recovered from since. So that put me out. That was a couple of months before the World Cup was happening over in Canada. So that sort of put me out of rugby at the time. So from there I was like, well, if I can't play sport, I'm going travelling. So that's what I did for a while. Came back to Galway, started working in medical devices. It took a few years, took nearly 3 years to sort my knee out, to figure out, because I'd been in my final year in university, I was walking on it, and it actually had started regenerating itself, so they decided not to operate on it at the time. But still getting a huge amount of pain that they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Technology wasn't as good back then. So started getting back to rugby eventually, but every game I played would blow up anyways, but I was determined I was going to play no matter what. started getting back in. Was playing with Galwegians at this time. Corinthians had folded. Kind of goes to, we had a brilliant coach when I was at Corinthians. He was absolutely amazing, and he ended up going on to be the Irish coach. But then he moved from Corinthians, and the next coach that came in the space of a season, the whole team just left. Every single one of them left, and the majority of them went to UL, and they were the basis of UL Bows becoming the strongest women's team in the country at the time. Because from our team back then, there were 7 of us on the Irish squad. So we had a really strong core group of women there. So came back, started playing back with Connacht again, got to about 2006, and after a holiday to Turkey, started feeling really, really unwell. Sort of started going downhill quite rapidly, but decided I wanted to go back and do sports science masters, because I thought, well, I really enjoy sports psychology, that's the area I'd love to be in. But by the time I came to the end of my masters, my health had deteriorated quite significantly. And it turns out now, only a few years ago, they've diagnosed me with Lyme's, but for years I was sort of, there's something wrong, but nobody seems to know what it is. So sort of only got to the postgrads, couldn't even finish my dissertation. So that sort of put the sports psychology out the door a bit. So got into corporate then and worked for years in corporate over in London. Came back to Ireland about 2016, decided to do the MBA here. I was on a rest period from work. I thought I'll be back in 6 months, it'll be grand. Realised after about 3 months I wasn't going to be back in 6 months, so I was like, what do? I'll do an MBA. I also got asked then to go out coaching. So I was like, yeah, it'll give me something to do, I'll go out coaching. And there was about 20 girls, not even 20 girls out in Corinthians at the time. So I started coaching them, and I could see there was a lot that could be done. So, and I took over the child welfare side of things too in the club. So I said, can you make me director of women's rugby? Let me have the decision making for all the girls and women's sections, and let me grow it. And you have some men still don't quite think women should be playing rugby. So there's a little bit of that left, but luckily the majority of people are a bit more enlightened these days. So they let me do that role, and in the last few years I've grown that now from 20 girls to over 80. So we've got teams from under 10 right up to, we're trying to start a senior team right now, so I've got about 6 or 7 girls, because I want that full pathway for the girls to come all the way through, and we're just putting in different initiatives to grow that year on year. I also became involved in the executive committee as well, and 2 years ago, COVID, just before COVID hit, I got voted in as their junior vice president. So then because of COVID, I'm still in that position this year. When I was doing the MBA, I decided I was going to do my leadership project on gender diversity in the IRFU. There's obviously it's a very male-dominated sport, it's a very male-dominated governance structure, same in the clubs. So I sort of blagged my way into letting me do all of that. I got it. They ran a leadership course that year, and the leadership course was aimed at either women in rugby or men who were involved in girls and women's rugby. So I was one of 16 chosen staff and volunteers from throughout the country to be on their leadership course. From that leadership course, they asked me if I would join the women's subcommittee up there, so I got co-opted onto that at the time. I also got asked if I would come in and chair the minis committee in Connacht Rugby. So minis is the 12s and under, so 6 to 12 year olds. So take over all of that remit. So did that for a couple of years, and then this summer just gone, Connacht were always sort of on the back foot. We only had 2 reps to the IRFU instead of 4 reps to the IRFU. So this year there was an internal review in the IRFU, and they decided Connacht needed their 4 reps. They're looking at incorporating the IRFU into a company, and as well as Connacht getting their 4 reps, that by 2023, off the 4 provincial reps, at least 1 has to be female, otherwise you lose that spot. Now, because Connacht got the 2 extra reps, my club decided to nominate me this year. And we went through, there's a review process, you then get interviewed, and then all the clubs have to agree that, yeah, they're happy for you to go on. So came through that, so I'm now, along with my ex-Irish captain, Fiona Steed, we're the first 2 women ever to be nominated onto the IRFU board. So that's been a bit of a journey. I'm now on 11 committees there. 11, yeah, I got a new one added yesterday, social media for women's rugby. I was like, okay. So 11 different committees. Luckily, most of it's remote. It's one of the things we've brought up. If you ever see a picture, you'll see it's mainly retired men. And the reason for that is obvious. You used to have to go to Dublin for every single meeting. If you're on more than a couple of committees, it's just not possible if you're working, or if you have kids, you just can't do it. So now that COVID has, when we talk about tech, COVID has significantly changed how governance can be done, and I think it's going to make a huge difference in the profile of people who will be able to go on boards like that who live outside of Dublin. So I think that brings me to about here. Yeah, that's where I am now. Yeah.
Brilliant. Jane Ann?
Yeah, so I'm Jane Ann, and I'm a chartered physiotherapist. I have my own business in Athenry, and I have my master's in sports medicine. I'm also a runner, so I know Peter through the athletic side of things. I have coached Kieran along the way at some stage as well, I just found out today.
So really not great.
I tried.
It's not the reason you're here, but...
I'm a believer in inclusive, okay? So basically, I suppose my athletics journey, I've always ran. So I've ran since I'm 7. So it's quite rare for someone to keep running the whole way through. Usually teenage years are a bit of a thing, especially with females in sport. They do tend to drop off then when there's a lot of focus on body image and everything. I was quite lucky, no more than what Ferguss said. I had a fabulous coach when I was young. I was always lucky to be quite good at running. It kind of just came naturally to me that I had a diesel engine. I'm not so good at speed, but I can go on for a good while. So I tended to be partnered up with boys. So as a result, I was quite a tomboy when I was in school. Unfortunately, I went to an all-girls secondary school, but it didn't stop my love for running. Like, I was known as the one who used to run at lunch break, out doing laps of the pitch when everyone else was inside, possibly putting on makeup. I continued to run, as I said, from the age of 7 the whole way through college. I got a scholarship to UCD based on my academic results, but I also got one for my running. So the dilemma at home was, from my parents' point of view, which was most financially lucrative. And it would have been actually the sporting one at the time, but I took the academic one because, as Fergus said, there's no money in athletics either, okay? And I wasn't delusional to think that I was ever going to make money from it. So I chose to go the academic scholarship and do well in my degree, obviously, and to keep running along as I did. So all through, I won a good few kind of juvenile, age 15, 16, 17 track races, 1500, 3000 metres. Cross country I always loved. And I've a good few national medals underage with cross country as well. I was never, I say it's unfortunate, but I was in a year where there was Mary Cullen, Linda Byrne and Fionnuala Britton, so they've all been in the Olympics, and I just happened to be the 4th person. Yeah. So I missed my chance. So I was competing against the whole way along. But you know, I never gave up running, and I loved it. And to this day, all my friends are through running. Like, I don't think any of my friends come from school. It is all actually true sport, and possibly that's why most of them are male as well. When I left college, then I did well in my exams, so I got a great job in UHG here, and I worked for 6 years in the HSE while still running. And I suppose from my professional point of view, my husband says there's a certain type of person who can never be employed, and unfortunately I think I am that person. So I knew I needed to leave the HSE, and it's not that there's something wrong with the organisation, but it was just there was massive equipment being bought and it wasn't being utilised, and I broached it with the heads department, and they were like, well, we're not a profit-making organisation. And I was like, I'm not saying you need to charge, I'm just saying we need to use it and maybe offer it for research. And it was like, not happening. So I handed my notice in. Again, at the time, I was only maybe 25, 26, so my parents were horrified that I was handing in my notice to a permanent pensionable job and going out into private practice in Oranmore. And it was the best decision I ever made. So I worked in Oranmore with Ruth Kiley, who I think might have done the MBA here as well. She owned Physio Career, so I started there The year I got engaged, let's say, and I went from maybe working 10 hours a week, because you have to build up your own clientele, you don't just take someone else's patients, to working 45 hours a week. But I loved it, okay? And it was fabulous. And I suppose from my personal, from the running side of things, my patient profile tended to be athletics-based, sports-based, and I could empathise with them, because if someone told me I couldn't run in the morning, I'd be horrified. So I would always say to them, I'm not going to say you'll never run again, like you'll never play rugby again, but we need to kind of make a plan and put a plan in place. So the technology mightn't have been there at the time, but I'd be all about periodisation and training plans. And, you know, my big thing even now when I'm coaching is every time you go out for a run, there needs to be a reason for that run. Like, you're just going out for punishment because you had the Mars bar yesterday, or is it because there's actually a benefit to this? Be it your mental health, fine, but there's a poor relationship with running seen as a torture thing, that like, you know, if oh God, I had like a few glasses of wine at the weekend, I'm going to go run and try and run that off. So now I do a lot of coaching with senior clubs, but also I coach in Crockwell with 3 different age groups, with juveniles, to try and promote running, I suppose, as a positive experience, and that even if you're going to be a rugby player, or let's say a footballer or a hurler, running fitness is the base, okay? And you know, even if you just do it for 6 months of the year and then go do the other sport for the other half, the fitness levels will carry over. I left when I had my first daughter in 2011. I was out running in Oranmore and my waters broke, so 5 weeks early, so it was a bit of a traumatic experience to the man whose house I had to go to as well as everything else. But once I had Sophie, then I actually, Ruth knew, my boss at Oranmore, I had always said when I have my own children I'll set up my own practice because it makes sense. So it was brilliant, and I would be very black and white, always have been, possibly because most of my buddies are men, you can say it straight to them, they don't hold a grudge. So I said to Ruth, which can be quite difficult in a business scenario, saying, you know, it's great now I've worked up my name and I've developed a profile, but I'm gone, okay? But she had offered to give me my patient list, and I said, no, I don't need the patient list. I'll advertise as me, Jane Ann. If they want to come, they can come, but I'm not going to ruin your business. You can keep, the charts are there in your practice, okay? So I had Sophie, and at the same time I was running really well. From a running point of view, I had been aiming to break 3 hours for the marathon, so that would be quite a good level, let's say, for a female runner, kind of nationally anyway. So I had always said, okay, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, and I had ran 3 marathons where in training I was sub 3 hour fit, but it was like in my head I had set 3 hours as my limit, and you know, I hadn't thought beyond that. And then after having Sophie and kind of time was a little bit limited, I changed my training somewhat from maybe instead of running 100 miles a week, I was running 80 miles a week. But I was like, that's it, I'm going to go for 255, you know, and I'm going to see what happens. And maybe then if I blow up, I'll have that 4-minute cushion to get it. And I went out and I ran 254.16, and it was like something, a penny dropped. It was like all the time I had set 3 hours as, this is the limit of your ability, Janelle, you've got 2 kids, you've got a bit, you know. But then when I took the barrier away, and maybe in one way I kind of let go of a little bit of the tech side, I did it. And then since then it was just straight away, every single marathon since then has been sub 3. If I ran 2 hours 59 in the morning, I'd possibly be disappointed, okay? Whereas 8 years ago, I would have been delighted. So from both a professional and a running point of view, I think tech is great, but I think also sometimes it can be a limiting factor. And as well, the other side of it is no more than in business. Like I set up my own business and then it grew like very well, but it went from being an individual person to I was employing 5 people, and I was working crazy hours, and I was trying to run 80 miles a week, and I had 2 children, and my husband's a GP, so it was just like, what's happening here? Something's going to have to give. So I had a very harsh and hard conversation with my accountant, and she was like, you do realise that you're actually making the same amount of money now as you were when you were a sole trader, but you're just paying other people as well. And I had to sit down and go home and go, what am I doing? Like, I'm working 45 hours a week, I'm paying wages for secretaries and other people, and then their holiday pay when they're not generating income. If anything happens from a patient profile, it comes back to me, so like from court cases and all the road traffic accidents. And it just made me sit down and go, okay, if you're going over this bracket, you're paying it all in tax. So I made a decision to I spoke to everyone in my practice and I was like, listen, you know, I'm hoping in the next year and a half to wind back down to being a sole trader. And they were fabulous. Again, I said it straight out. I didn't let it linger. I didn't try to slowly stop answering the phone call or anything so their list would become quiet. And both Shane, Rachel and Esther, they all got jobs that they wanted and actually are all working in the HSC now. But, you know, they went into the jobs and they are happy where they are. And I'm now back as a sole trader on my own. COVID came, obviously my husband had to work. So I took 3 months off and I realised that I would not be the best homeschool teacher, as much as I love my kids. So I did that for a while and then I went and did vaccinations for a while because obviously I'm a physio, so I was kind of obliged to do it if I wasn't working. And I built a little clinic at home in my house where basically it's outside, obviously not in my house, it's outside of my site where I'm doing all sports medicine now. All along in the time I got on the Athletics Ireland Marathon Mission Panel, so basically it means you're in the top kind of 10 marathon runners for Ireland, female. I was in theory on the panel for the Tokyo Original Olympics, but then again I had to kind of have the tough call of, okay Jeanne, if you want to ever really make the Olympics, you're going to have to run faster and you're going to have to it's going to have to be your job, because you know it's going to be 35-40 hours a week. And I didn't want it. That's the short, like, you know, not that I didn't want it, I did want it, but I didn't have the time and I knew I didn't have the mental strength to give up everything else, what would be needed to do it. So I made a decision that, you know, I'm quite happy. I want to race hard with the time I can, but I want to have a business and I want to be there as a mum as well for my 2 children and not to miss out on kind of their ages and the years that they're in at the moment. So currently, I'm working as I suppose a sports medicine specialist at home in the clinic. I do coaching with senior clubs on a Tuesday night, and I coach in Crockwell with the juvenile athletics of 3 different age groups, with the distance running, and I coach with soccer as well. And then myself, I am training for a 2:45 marathon in April time in Manchester. So that is me.
I did say they were high achievers, but I'm also honest. Very good. So, look, okay, one of the main focus of today is to talk about the role of technology. Now, all of you have referred to technology in some way. And I know from chatting to all of you individually that I know there's no one magic technology that solves everything or, you know, gets people to win races or win cups or whatever. But it'd be great maybe if each of you could think about, maybe tell us about 1 or 2 technologies that you say do make a significant difference in your respective fields. And maybe, given that we know there's no one magic bullet and that there is negatives and all of that, feel free to talk about the negatives as well. But maybe, as you talk about each technology, if you could think of maybe how good people tend to use these technologies and maybe they know where the limit is. So if you can think of someone in your head that's used that technology well versus somebody that possibly hasn't. So I'm not sure who'd like to start.
Well, I'll go because in case we all say the same thing, I want. So there is one. Before I actually talk about the technology, because it's related, your point about getting rid of the technology, and the technology was an inhibitor when you were quantifying things. You had hard numbers, you had binary. You know, you were this 3 hour, sub 3 hour.
Strip on your wrist. Clicking the miles. Quick
story: I was doing the Galway streets of Galway, and I wanted to hit 26:40, around 26:40 for the 8K. And I stayed up the night before calculating in my head or remembering what the aggregate, what the aggregate time was for each consecutive kilometre. So the first one might have been, 3:45, and the second one was double that. And then I was talking to a buddy of mine's dad, and he was a great runner, Noel Harvey, but he ran that same distance in about 23 minutes, just to put it in perspective. So he said to me, the watch is a nuisance, get rid of the watch, watch is a nuisance. And I was like, hum and haws, I don't know. But anyway, I decided that race I would not wear a watch. It was the first time I didn't wear a watch for a race. And I did the race anyway, and I finished in like 2:41 without looking at the watch, or 26:41. And it was just an example of how we undermine the power of our intuition and, you know, our subconscious, which apparently is like capable of amazing mathematics, you know. And if you think about sometimes when you want to wake up at a certain time and you set 3 alarms because it's so important, and you wake up 1 minute before that time, like how does that actually work? Does anyone explain that? No, I don't think so. So just to put that there, you know, as you know, I wonder, sometimes it's about really getting away from the hard numbers and not getting crunched in the numbers. But obviously the numbers have their place. But for me, the technology would be, when I was doing tempo runs, the ability to see my heart rate and to have an auto lap. So I'm on my own and I'm running tempo, and I'm running it in this particular tempo. I was actually doing threshold running, so I was running in the orange zone, and I wanted to run at a heart rate of about 165, and I could just see each mile, I was in miles, each mile coming up, you know, and that for me was just an amazing kind of support, because I didn't have to. I could concentrate on I was kind of concentrating on how I felt internally, instead of thinking, well, what time is it? And, you know, I could feel the vibration of the watch letting me know I'd done the first mile, and then I could quickly glance. So that was definitely technology helping. And as a result of that, I ran PBs in training sometimes. I remember running just under 33 minutes for 10K, staying in the orange zone and thinking I was shot, because the first 2 miles were so slow, and then the last 4 miles just came through like a train, because I was kind of trusting my heart as opposed to thinking that each mile had to be a specific time. I was using the heart rate, so I think that's where the technology. It's my technology.
I might, if I could just, same kind of theme, you know, like obviously, look, nearly all of these things, there's good and bad to them, you know. You know, we can, like with most things, you can argue for and against. But with regards to things like the wearable watches, you know, if you're like the Garmins and the Fitbits and now the Apples and all the, I mean, there's tons of them out there. So they are great, and I can see again why you would say it inhibits you, because you become reliant on it, and for me that's a big problem, because what happens when it breaks? What happens, you know, if it doesn't sync properly with the GPS and you're in the locality that you're doing it in, and you've done all your training and everything is completely relying on this feedback. And the danger then is when you're getting this feedback the whole time, this is telling you you're not really conscious of you. And you know, to do these kind of speeds at marathon, you can't be relying on you have to know you. Yeah. All right? And you have to know when you is working and when you isn't working. So this can be, I ended up, again, I would have relied on it a lot when they came out first. And I remember I did Ironman Italy, and when I came off the bike and I went to start to run, it just stopped working. And I spent probably 3 or 4 Ks like banging on it and hitting and going. And it upset me, and it shouldn't have upset me. So after that I said, I'm never relying on it again. I will always bring it with me, but I will make sure that I do a certain amount of training sessions without a watch on me, or I'll bring the watch and I'll cover the screen, because the feedback later, you know, so if I want to do like a 160, whatever, you know, 165 heartbeat for my pieces, at least then, you know, I kind of do my session, I say, well, that's what it felt like, and now I look at my watch and see, well, did it feel, or was it what it felt like? So I begin then to teach my body what the watch is telling me, so that if anything goes wrong, I don't need it. But that for me is a big problem with these people become completely reliant on it. And that's for any sport. And it's also a big bit, like I'm, you know, I suppose I'm of an age now where it's like old school, you know, and I like old school stuff. You know, I like there's a bit of me hates now that in rugby you can analyse everything to death, and when you're walking out onto a pitch, the opposition knows exactly what your lineouts are, what exactly your move. So when they see your shape, because they've analysed you to death through the video analysis equipment that's available, they know exactly what you're going to do. Whereas I kind of like the idea of not knowing and having to make a decision, based on your intuition as a player and your ability as a player, rather than what you learnt in the classroom. But yet I can see that the technology has allowed the likes of the rugby and the soccer to be more efficient then in how they train. So that when they go and do their lineouts or their scrums in training, they're a bit more efficient about how they go do things, because they learn stuff in the classroom, then take it out onto the pitch, as opposed to be hours on the pitch learning what they can learn very quick in the classroom. So there, again, there's pluses and minuses. And I also have, I suppose, a big bugbear as well about young coaches relying on technology and not learning to become good coaches first. So having the technology tell them when to stop, when to start, all this, instead of using their coaching intuition, learning to a certain extent by mistakes. So making a mistake with an athlete by pushing them too much or not pushing them enough, but realising that as a coach that I made a mistake, rather than looking for some bit of software or hardware to tell me I made a mistake. And then as you get more experience and you learn that this is what happened, now add the technology to it. Whereas I've seen a lot of coaches, a lot of young, especially when I was at Munster Rugby, I've seen a lot of young coaches come into us out of sports science, and they were miles ahead of me when it came to the science, because of, they had more new technology. They were miles ahead of me when it came to video analysis and all this stuff. But you ask them to go out into the pitch now and put something into practice and coach, which is, in essence, is the job. They couldn't do it. So again, like with all these, pluses and minuses, and you can do everything. You can do everything. You can measure pretty much anything. And we have, I'll stop now after this bit, but we have this device output. We're using these in the college. I don't know if you've come across them. There's a crowd, there's a sports scientist and a physiotherapist up in UCD came out with this. There's a little device here, right? And it has, I don't know what, it has accelerometers and all sorts inside in it. And this can pretty much measure anything I need. It'll do functional screen measurements. It'll measure jump heights. I can use it for speed. I can use it, put it in the bar. We do a lot of work now in strength and conditioning called velocity-based training. So you use the velocity of the bar to tell you where you are in relation to your 1 rep max repetition. So it's easier to hit the sweet spot in training. And this will tell you, you go by the speed at which the bar moves. And any one day you can be tired or fresh. So you go on the speed of the bar rather than the weight on the bar. But this little device will do all that. But my problem is it does way too many things. Way too many things. And we're getting tons of information on what do we do with it. What do we do with it? So it's a fantastic device. You get the output on a tablet, but it has so many things you're looking at going, oh my God, what am I doing here? So you've got to be very specific then in what you're looking for with the devices that you have. Sorry, no, I rambled on.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So, as you mentioned that, you use the watch so that it can, vibrate at a certain period of time, and for you, you are measuring with this, and you are getting a lot of data for any of the performance. So, isn't it increasing the stress within the individuals? They are receiving so many data. Probably you run for first mile within 30 seconds, and then next for 35. So you feel you took 5 more seconds to run for that next mile, and might be your watch is not, if it's not vibrating at that time, so you might feel stressed at that moment. So for me particularly, I feel that receiving so many data, it is increasing stress in the people. And I have a very nice example as well. As soon as this COVID started, so one of my neighbor, I was there back in India, so one of my neighbor, he was very healthy, and all of a sudden, I don't know why, he was watching TV, and he has oximeter in his hand. So he 70% or something, and he gets so scared, he runs towards parking to get into his car so that he can reach to hospital, and he he slip near the lift and broken hand. A healthy man with the wrong output from the technology in next 5 minutes was with a broken hand.
I do think there is an element of like paralysis by analysis. Like that's where a good coach comes in, because the data is all well and good, but you need to know what you're looking for in the data as well. And like from my point of view, people will come into me and Garmin has this thing inbuilt into it now, Garmin Coach. So, my watch told me today I go out and do this. So they're going out and doing it. And I'm like, okay, but did you sleep last night? And like, what's going on in your day? But the watch told me to do it. And then they're coming into me and they're like, my back is killing me. And I'm like, well, why did you do the session? Because the watch told me. And I'm like, you know, what are you doing? And like, my husband will have people coming into him in the GP practice and like, last night when I was asleep, it detected it, my heart rate skipped, and he's like, what? You know, but people are getting so preoccupied with what's going on, and that it's, like you said, like, you know, maybe they were in the REM stage of the sleep cycle, and they did, you know, when you feel like you're going to fall out of the bed and do that kind of thing, like that can trigger their heart rate to go up. But everything's become so sensitized that that's where I do think it can be a limiting thing as well. And it's risky. It needs to be in the right hands. I know the guys I was saying earlier on down in the canteen. I did research doing my sports medicine masters, and we had like electrodes on our knee and our hip, and we were measuring the counter jump movements and all this, and it was so frustrating because it had to be so specific, and then you get sweaty and they'd start slipping, and everyone became so preoccupied with the angle at the knee, and I was like, okay, come on, like, we're physios, you know, it doesn't really matter. What I'm interested in, are they injured? So I think data and technology is great, but it needs to be relevant. Like people with their steps challenge, the amount of people that come into me and I'll say, well, are you active? Because they might have a bit of weight on them, they've got back pain and they're wondering why. And I'm like, well, and they're like, well, look, my watch tells me I'm doing my, whatever it is, 20,000 steps. And I'm like, but that's not a limit. You know, that is your minimum. But people have come, like, well, I've done it, so now I can sit down for the day. Whereas it's kind of, you know, too much information maybe in the wrong hands sometimes can be the problem as well. Like your buddy who broke his arm just because he was rushing to get his oxygen sats up.
You know, it's funny, you mentioned about the sleep, and you mentioned about the stress on people. So, you know, these things will tell you that they can measure your sleep and your sleep quality, and they can't, right? Yeah. They can maybe give you an idea of maybe how long you prefer to sleep, but they can't, because they just can't. And they go by movement. And what they've shown as well in some of the research, that people that will use these a lot are the people that have trouble sleeping. And what this then does is it actually gives them more trouble sleeping, because they're twisting and turning. I got to go to sleep because I need to get my result in the morning from my watch to show that I had a good night's sleep.
And the new hoop thing.
Yeah.
Has anyone heard about the hoop?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, like people are going, well, it's 87% recovered today, and I'm like, what? You know, it's just people they're analysing their sleep patterns, and it is another kind of gimmick then to see,
And what you'll see, and look, the big thing about all of these, it's like anything. I often, when I talk about, especially about sports supplements as opposed to technology, somebody's sponsored. So we see these because we see somebody is sponsored by it. So you have, you know, one of Fiona's teammates, Fintan McCarthy, who won a gold medal in Tokyo, he uses a hoop, and he wears it here. Now, I asked him one day about it, and I wasn't getting into, because he was happy with it, so I wasn't going to start messing with his head. But kids will see that, and they'll see that he has it. And what could happen is Whoop now could contact him and say, well, will you advertise for us? You know, and you see it a lot. You know, I ran the race and I'm using the Roger Federer, and I wear this when I'm playing tennis. But what we got to remember is they're getting paid to say it. They may never wear them, or they may wear them and never use them. So we got to be very careful when it comes to celebrities, sports, movie stars, or any advertising, anything like this, because they're getting paid to say it works.
Did you have a question?
The comments really, because it's interesting you're talking sleep, because I just bought this before the Masters, and we have the Oura ring, and it's for sleep monitoring, and it's temperature and accelerometers and other things in it. But I find it excellent, because I'm just getting out of it, what patterns help me sleep? for example, if I drink coffee late at night or an eat or if I'm not getting enough exercise. So for me, it's just building my awareness. But that's it. That's all I wanted to do. Once I'm aware of what's good for me, then I'm not going to need to wear it as much. But I get your point. You could actually look at the information on the app every day and go, oh my God, I did this, so I need to do a little bit more of that. But it's much made of it, once you get out of it. But if you overanalyze, then you're into another feedback loop that's probably not to your advantage.
Yeah, I agree with that, because myself and Kieran were having this conversation about, you know, and Kieran has the same opinion as yourself about the sleep, you know, and I'm sure it's well found and based on more information than my pure belief that it is good. But I kind of think that some of these, you're getting insights, I think, from the ring, because it's connected to an app. You get insights, and then the insights are basically telling you, well, you got to sleep at this time and you woke up at this time. So you kind of know what time you woke up at, but do you really know exactly what time you went to sleep at? Probably not, because your eyes are closed and it's dark and you're not looking at your watch. Yeah. You know, so I think some of it's good, because, and then, like you say, you can see patterns, you can say averages as well, because unless you're taking down what you're sleeping, how are you supposed to know what your monthly or your weekly average is? And then you can make correlations. Go, oh, I got the flu, and you look back and go, well, my average sleep at the time I got the flu was 6.5 hours. So you can kind of validate some things, because you'll hear things out there go, oh, you know, you don't need 7 hours, you don't need 8 hours, you know, you can survive on 5. And then you go, well, actually, when I did survive on 5, I didn't, because I got a flu or whatever. So I like it.
And so I would argue, that's right, but I would argue, and I would say the key thing is, the absolute key thing is, when you wake up in the morning, do you feel you had a good night's sleep? That's all you need. That is all you need. Yes, I had a good night's sleep, or no, I had a bad night's sleep.
So just to challenge you all for a minute. So again, as we talk through these, I mean, you've talked about the use of technology and analytics and metrics actually ruining the purity of the game, you know, and sometimes giving too much information. Issues around the information being in the wrong hands, and there being too much of it. So those are definitely issues, and you've talked about adverse effects of those. And I can definitely see, if we think back to the group and everyone going back to their own workplace, not necessarily sport, I think you could probably learn similar things, that there's probably people in the workplace that are overly measuring things. I know in academia we count the number of publications that someone throws out, whether they're higher quality or not is very questionable. And I'm sure in every field you have the same thing, and there's probably people using analytics in the wrong way and using numbers in the wrong way. So I'm just wondering, though, then, to challenge, given all those are from what you're saying, definitely limitations, is there any, maybe even yourselves, but is there any athletes or teams that you'd say are actually very clever at getting that balance right? They tend to know when to use the technology, how to use it, when not to use it, or when to break away from it. Are there any teams or athletes that you can think of?
I actually think, just because it's a very recent one, and it was quite controversial, which they tend to be, Razzie Erasmus is absolutely a genius in how he uses different elements of tech. For anybody who watches rugby, it's very hard to say you're going to enjoy watching South Africa play rugby. You know, they don't play pretty rugby. But yet, he uses the analysis he has to beat the best in the world. You know, he's a genius at how he applies, because he's a good coach. I don't know, were you working with him when he was in Munster?
Yeah.
He's a great coach, and he knows us how to use that input he gets from us. And then he goes a step further. He knows how to beat the team is to make sure the refs play to the way he wants them to play. So then he uses social media and goes on an hour rant. And if you analysed how the refs behaved from the previous game to that last game, they fundamentally changed how they referee the game based on how he'd used technology to put his point across. Now, he probably should be heavily disciplined for it, you know, it's not in the spirit of the sport, but he's one of those people who uses it very well.
I think Cristiano Ronaldo would be a prime example as well. Like, he is defined like age-wise, and then he's endlessly killing everyone's dreams in the last few seconds of games recently. But I remember seeing a documentary on him, and they were doing all the performance analysis and everything, and he was really kind of having none of it. And it was his peripheral vision, like his natural talent, where he could anticipate where the ball was going, and he was like, it's nothing to do with, technology, like I can sit in front of these simulation games and everything, but you know, you have to work to your advantage. And he would say why he can score in those is because of concentration. It's nothing technology. It's because he believes he can do it, number one. He doesn't give up. And the fact that he is not old, but he is older than a lot of them, but he still thinks he is one of the best. So, and like if you saw like him as an athlete in performance, the fact that his career has been so long, and to this day, like he can still perform even in those last, like he's basically saving Manchester United at the moment. They're reliant on him. And I'm not a big soccer person, but just I find it interesting. I don't actually like him as an athlete, but I have to admire him as an athlete because you can't take away from what he does. And in COVID, I actually, we go to Portugal a bit, so I did a diploma in Portuguese and did it online. So we were in Portugal for midterm, and we went to Benfica Stadium, and even in there they had a physio room. So I went into it because I was interested to see what it was like, but they had all these analysis things, and then I asked the lady in Portuguese when the players come, and she was like, oh, Ronaldo would never come in here. And she was just, and I was like, what do you mean? And she said that he's not into that at all. He does his own thing. It's all about his quiet space, his head space, and the belief in himself. So, like, I think definitely, you know, what you're saying, like, you can analyse it, but then it can also, you can use it to a certain point. But at the end of the day, did you sleep well? Are you focused? Can you concentrate? You know, they're key things to perform well.
Yeah, I think if you look at, I don't know necessarily of any one team, to be honest, that use a good or bad, but where I know a situation where in a sport where it's shown to be hugely beneficial but also not, depending on the competition, that's cycling. Cycling, it's everything in professional cycling. You know, they measure everything, and they have somebody in the car following, and they have earpieces in the cycle, and they're constantly getting information, your power output in the pedal, they have their heart rates, where you are in the race in relation to everybody else, they have everything. And it works great. But where you see the negative part is when cycling go to the Olympics, they're not allowed any of this. They're not allowed the earpieces, it's different rules. It's like amateur rules now. And you'll see the best teams go to pot. And you'll see riders that maybe wouldn't be expected to do well, because they can make a breakaway, or a few can make a breakaway, but the pack don't know what's going on behind because they don't have this technology helping them out. But cycling is, you see British cycling, I mean, David Beresford and his group at British Cycling, I mean, look, controversies aside and jiffy bags and all this, you know, with questions about drugs, but still behind it all is they use technology to the nth degree, you know, to the extent we even had a conversation last week over in the sports office. We were talking about British cycling, we were talking about the suits that they wear. And they were designing, every Olympics there's new suits and new designs, and they do the wind tunnel testing them. And I can't remember which it was. Chris Hoy, maybe, who was one of the best ever, was at home after they did some testing, and he was chatting to his wife over dinner, and the wife goes, well, what happens when the suit gets wet? And he's like, oh, we didn't think of that. You know, we didn't think of the aerodynamics when the suit gets wet, we practice it. Which said in competition they get wet through sweat. So they went back and they wet them, and they tried them again, and they discovered that they were actually faster wet than they were dry. So they go, like, literally they go to the nth degree, because you're looking at, like, a wheel, a millimetre is the difference between winning and losing cycling at the top level. And the bikes that they produce, you know, again, it's all down to the information they get in their wind tunnels, but they produce bikes, and every Olympics you'll see a bike on the start line that you'll have never seen before. All down to the technology that's available to them and how to use it.
Similar, I think, people that were involved in the Sky team got behind the sub 2 hour marathon.
Yes.
And Kipchoge, and that was a really interesting, you know, kind of use case where they used wind tunneling to figure out the formation of the running team that would run on front, beside, and behind the main athlete, and it was actually a diamond that they came up with, and they actually use like figurines to
Okay.
figure out, you know, where would you get the least amount of wind impact on the central figure. But then down as well, and we were talking about this before, how they had this long loop that they created.
Yeah.
It was a straight loop that turned around and came back. It was about a 10k loop. I think it was a 10k. But they banked it. They banked it on either side, a bit like an indoor track or a running track, so that when you're running at that speed, sub 2 hour marathon, it's fast. It's really, really, really fast.
Yeah.
Like, and when you're going around even a fairly big arc, you know, you can start drifting out. So they banked it, and so I think they got that. They basically used every trick in the book that you can imagine to control the entire
But
environment.
they had a line in front of him as well, that as he was running, he was following the line.
That's right, the lasers, from the car. Yeah, it was fascinating.
But actually, taking that as a good point, and again, if we're thinking of, you know, people watching this or people in the room that are managing their own teams, and, you know, again, the difference between success and failure could be your team or your company going out of business. If we look back to Kipchoge as a really good example, so they use, as you said, they use analytics and the data right down to a thing where they put that little bank at each end, which I think was crossed 8 times. You'd think in a 2-hour race, 8 little loops or 8 little things around turning the corner wouldn't make much of a difference, but it clearly did. So even though all of you have talked about the limits of technology and maybe it's taking the fun out of the game and to some degree, and data isn't used well in some cases, is it inevitable that to succeed you have to be exploiting all of those at the real high end of the game now, to win the medals and to do the sub 2 hour thing, that you will always have to be playing that tech game and pushing things right to the edge and possibly taking the fun out of it, but needing to do that to win? Is that an inevitable thing in sport for any kid starting out?
I think so. Well, I'm hoping so, because that's how my business will succeed. If you look to any of the studies, and I was trying to find it recently again, I think it's something like 86% of the time the coach calls it wrong on gut instinct, because which you'll have learned all about in the MBA, their unconscious bias is going to kick in. So if they, you know, prefer one athlete over another, their perception of how that athlete plays could be very different to how they play. And even if you look at talent ID programs across every single sport, particularly now that they're getting younger, talent ID programs only get it right 1% of the time. Like the Junior Wimbledon is a case in point. I think there's only 2 tennis players ever who won Junior Wimbledon who ever made it as an adult player. So I think, and you know, you still need that analysis, because coaches' instincts and what they know and their biases are all going to come into play, and that subjectivity means they're not going to get it right, and they won't ever be able to in a long-term sense.
I think you need kind of I suppose a balance, I would hope. I suppose I'm not a team sport, I'm more kind of the individual sport, so I think for the team it would be different from a dynamic and from picking positions. But with an individual sport like running, I would think that, yeah, you use the technology, but I would kind of be more Ferguss style of a little bit of old school of trust the body, and sometimes, you know, don't analyse it, and, you know, go out and run when you want to run, and like trust your gut and know how to feel, because lots of city marathons, the big problem as well is when you go through a tunnel, you lose GPS and people forget, and then you see them coming out the tunnel doing this thing, and like it can throw you so quickly. And little things like the first time I ever broke 3, I remember coming in towards Old Trafford, and it was mile 24. It was in Manchester, obviously, and I remember looking at my watch and thinking, oh crap, I'm going to blow, because people around me were pulling up, and it was like a scene from something where people were grabbing their legs, and I was running with a buddy. And I remember saying to him, we're definitely going to break sub 3. And he was struggling. And I was like, just think about it. This is just the second leg of a race we used to do regularly together. And he said, he just let me go then. And I went, but I was like, I'm not looking at the watch again. And I just went. And I went on field. And I pulled away from him in 2 miles. I think I gained 48 seconds on him, which is a lot in the last 2 miles of a marathon, because we were matched per second the whole way up. But if I kept looking at the watch, it would have, like, I would have definitely still broke 3. I would have just done 2:55, but I did 2:53 something, because I was like, no, I feel good, and I know I'm going to get there now. Yeah. And then it comes to the Kipchoge thing, the Vaporfly shoes. I don't think any, so that's where I think it will come in. Like, let's say in an Olympic marathon or a level like that, when it comes to it, I don't think anyone will win an Olympic marathon that's not in a carbon plate shoe at the moment. It doesn't have to be Nike, obviously, it can be whatever. But I think that it does have a perceived, there is a physiological benefit there, but also I think there's a placebo effect too. If you stand up on the line and you're thinking everyone around me's got a carbon plate and I'm here in my whatever, I think your head would play games with you too. Yeah.
Do you know, I think as well, there's a huge appetite out there for wanting to know how things are done, why things are done, how can somebody run so fast, how can somebody cycle so fast, how can we get this Formula 1 car moving faster than the next. And you have the whole area of the sports science, you know, and you have, like, the sports sciences aren't going to stop. They're going to keep going, wanting to know more and more and more and more, which is going to feed into the sport. You'll have somebody in some game or some activity who will go to a university and say, we want to know, we're like 10 seconds off the world record. We want to know, how can we get the world record? Bring you into a lab, analyse, you know, the way you run. I don't know, will it ever stop? My concern, I go back to, is always, are coaches getting the right information? Are they getting too much information? You know, stopping the sports scientists just throwing every single bit of information at them, because they don't need it. You know, and that's always been my worry, is just the noise. Let's say the noise, and picking out what you need in the noise.
I think at underage as well, like when you're coaching, it'll be a big thing. Like some kids come up and they've got Garmin watches and they're only 10 and 11, and I'm like, put the watch away. Like, we're running and you're going to hurt, and you're going to enjoy it, and we're going to do hill reps, but they're pressing buttons, and I think, you know, they don't need it. It's not technical then, it's supposed to be fun. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, you know, with all these new technologies, and, you know, we're trying to figure it out as we go. In such a high stakes game, how do you balance experimentation, or is it even part of your thinking, or how do you introduce new information? Because it seems like it's quite a high risk, you don't want to expose people to something that you know, detrimental to them, but you also want to figure out the new stuff, and there's a little bit of a balancing act there.
That's where academies can be handy. you can. But I even remember, just for technology aside, you'd often practice something new in the academy, see how it goes before you do it on the senior team. You know, same thing, and that's why you go to a sports scientist and you say, what will this do for me, or what won't it do for me? Or, you know, and our sports scientists, with someone like Kieran, that comes together and with some artificial intelligence idea and put it together and go back to the coach when they know it works.
I think as well, if we relate it back to work, if you're managing people, you need to know their personalities. You know, you can't blanket manage everybody the same. It's just not going to work well. And it's the same when you're dealing with athletes. So if you know your athletes well as a coach, you know the ones who want to know more, who like the more in-depth detail, and you know the ones who, if you give them a 5-second clip, they've switched off by 3 seconds into it. So you want to approach people in the way that they're going to learn the most from and how they'll benefit the most. And there will be players who will push you for more information and who will want to experiment with new technologies because that's the way their mindset is. And there's other players who could be just as good, who don't want to know. They walk off a pitch and they're like, I'm done. Don't send me anything else. That's it. And it's the same in work.
Do you know what I found as well is the guys that you'd say, I don't like the word natural athlete because I don't believe in it, but the people that are, you know, come across as more natural, what I found wanted less. The people that maybe aren't quite as good will rely on the technology because they're not maybe as good an athlete, they're not maybe as powerful or as fast, so they're looking for something. So maybe in the rugby, for example, one of the best players I ever worked with, I'm sure you played with Rosie Foley, I'm sure, but her brother Anthony, God rest him, he was probably the best and most intelligent rugby player I ever worked with. He wasn't the strongest, the fittest, the fastest, or anything like that. As an athlete, you'd say he wasn't great, but if you watched the game, he always knew where to be. He always knew how to, so he used technology to help him to read the game.
Yeah.
and make up for the deficits that he had as an athlete. And as a result, he looked like a super athlete when he wasn't necessarily a super athlete.
Yeah, I was just going to how do you coach or think about coaching for resilience, particularly like, this always on data work, and particularly around like food and linking to the new ones I see coming out now, like Live Power, it's always on glucose monitoring and stuff like that. It's going to an app on your phone, and like, Olympics after Olympics, athletes do things that the world previously thought were physically impossible. So like, you wake up in the morning and you think your resting heart rate should be 50 and it's 58, because you've lost it. Like, either consciously or subconsciously, even if you're a young athlete, that has to throw you. Just wondering how you guys think about coaching resilience, I think, towards that. We accept that we're going to live in a more technologically connected world. Is it just don't go near the technology, or think about coaching resilience to that?
I don't think you can tell them not to go near the technology, particularly younger if I look at my 2-year-old niece, she knows how to use a phone. My dad can't, but she can. So I don't think you can tell them not to go near the technology. But when I'm coaching youths, like Jane Ann said, you want them to have fun. It shouldn't be about the result. It should be about, them having fun. You're bringing them through a pathway where they're learning the correct techniques. You're not focusing on them winning. You're focusing on, them improving their performance each time and giving the best. So I think if you have an ethos that isn't about winning and is more about the process and the outcome, that will build resilience in your athletes, because you're not putting them under that pressure to always be the best or to always win or to come first in everything they do. You're bringing them through this, each time you do it, give it everything, give it 100%, and if you do your best, that's all I ask from you. And I'm a big believer in meditation too. I think that's fundamental in trying to switch off from life as we know it at the moment, just to get that downtime, quiet time, however you want to do it. Like, meditation could be your run or a swim or however you want to just quieten down your mind. I think that's very important as well.
Digital detox.
Yeah.
I would think that with them to kind of resilience, it's more, let's say, so their heart rate was up that day, but it's only one day, so let's go for the periodization, 3 weeks, see what happens, see if there's a pattern of up, down, not necessarily any fancy technology, literally just check it every morning if that's what you want to do. We'll chat about it in 3 weeks' time, and if there is a pattern, then we'll discuss it, but until then,
I think that's key, is patterns. It's
Recognise
once off, we don't worry about. But it's a couple of things. One, I think it's an interesting question about resilience now with technology, because do we need to become resilient to the technology is probably one question. But the other thing is, we have a culture now, especially with kids, is that it has to be fair. There's no such thing as a winner, and that doesn't create resilience, at all. The only way, I think, not the only way, but the big thing with sport in how you learn resilience is you learn how to deal with failure.
Yeah.
And if we're down at soccer training with the under 10s or 12s, and we're playing a game for the last 20 minutes to finish, and one team has scored 10 goals and the other has 1, and you say next goal wins kind of thing, or that doesn't help with resilience at all. And there's a friend of mine, I don't know if any of you here know her, Anya McNamara. She's a huge, she's recognised worldwide in her papers and her research in talent development and that side of things. She works currently out at DCU. She's a UL graduate, but most of her research are done in what's called a rocky road to success. And what we see through our research, for the majority, it's not all, but for the majority of successful people, and if you look at business as well, I remember things like Macy's, for example, the big shop in the States is one example from a business point of view. Most of these fail multiple times before they become successful. And it's the failure and the getting up and the learning from the failure. And it goes back to what Peter said earlier on, and it's one thing I learned through my time at my MBA class, coming from a sporting background, where openness to be criticised and openness to feedback and having this Peter could tell me this is what you did wrong today and I'll accept it because we both want to be better. You don't see that so much in business. You know, in business it's not nice, we can't be critical of each other. Whereas sport is much more this team and work, but that creates resilience. So the idea of failure as a group or as an individual working with your coach, where did it go wrong? You know, how can I be better the next time? And really looking at it, for me that's what creates resilience. But the idea with the kids of everything being fair, we're just leading everyone down a path of failure.
I actually think the woman who came up with that actually said, you're using it wrong.
Yeah.
I didn't mean everybody gets a trophy for participation.
Okay.
It was about the effort they put into doing.
Okay.
So they're meant to be rewarding effort, not participation. And she actually came out a few years and went, you're using it wrong.
Okay.
It's interesting that rocky road and, you know, through adversity comes, you know, or you hear a lot like if it's worth doing, no pain, no gain type thing. You hear a lot, but I actually heard that there's a correlation between successful runners and that are born later in the year. If you think about it, it's because they had to run, you know, in schools, they'd be running probably against kids that were in the year ahead of them. So if you're born in January, you're going to run in the nationals. You're going to run, and you're in first year. You're going to run against, you know. So you're constantly. It's like you've got those heavy boots on training. You know, and it's hard. And then from that adversity comes the iron.
So my friend Aronia, who I was telling you about, one of the papers she did research on was they did it in the Leicester Tigers Rugby Club in England, and they looked at this, and what they discovered was the majority of kids that were brought into the Leicester Academy were all born in the first quarter, the majority, but they had some that were born in the third and fourth quarter, and when they found after the academy process and when they were signing professional contracts. Now they had more people coming from the third and fourth quarter becoming professionals than the first quarter, and it's back to the reason one is because they have to fight for everything. They're more resilient because they're generally smaller physically, mentally, everything. They're a little bit behind, and to get there, they've had to put up with a lot more.
Used to failure.
Yeah.
Actually, Leicester, I was on a webinar that a couple of the Leicester Academy coaches were on, and the way they bring in their academy players, and they judge them on the more psychological stuff. They judge them on coachability and those sorts of elements more so than, like what you said, because they know now that the physicality can change quite rapidly, particularly in boys at that age. So they're looking at the more mental side of how you can judge who's going to be success. And they're looking at family. It's amazing that they're looking at their family backgrounds, you know, their age grades, how they receive feedback. It's really in depth what to do now.
So an interesting one then, given as you talk about not everyone being equal. Again, when you've talked a lot through your various experiences, you are talking about the elite end and, you know, Olympics and Ronaldo and winning marathons and so on. But in the workplace, you know, you have the A team players and then you have the C team or D team or no team. Players as well. So I'm just wondering, when you talked about the reliance on technology and being able to move away from the technology and rely on your own, how you feel and what you know, I'm just wondering, that sounds good for an elite athlete who probably has a really strong, first of all they have huge experience, but they have a lot of knowledge about their own, and they've invested a lot in learning about their own body and about what's needed. But I'm just wondering for the C team, the ones that are struggling or average or below average, do you see technology, a role for more increased role for technology for helping those people, when people are starting to run or starting to play rugby or starting to do these things, is technology more of a help to them or is it actually something you'd...
Well, no, I think from a business point of view, from, let's say, growing my own business and then to make a decision to come down, I think technology is good there because if you have performance indicators of, let's say, the income someone's bringing in, and how many times that patient comes back, or if there was a complaint, like, you know, it's factual. So I think it's an easy way. Then there's no bullying. Nothing can be said that, well, that's your opinion. It's black and white, and I think it's kind of, you need to set a precedent in business from the word go that even in the interview process, like I would have always, when I was interviewing my potential staff, I'd be like, okay, it's going to be every 2 weeks we will have a meeting. If there's anything wrong, I will say it. I don't want you to go off in a huff. If you have something to say to me, you say it back to me, and then it's done. There's no postmortems, there's no, this kind of thing. I want it to be open discussion. And I do think, now obviously I'm a small business, I think that will be much more trickier in a bit, but I think if the fundamental principles, everyone has local managers, if it is there from the word, like I've never had an issue, and physio is female dominated, so it comes with its own challenges there. I've never had an issue in the workplace at all, because it's been on the table from the word go. But like, figures speak for themselves, so if you can show them it, you can do all these data spreadsheets of, well, your average patient comes back 4 times, and then they're discharged, and you fill in a discharge report, or your average patient isn't coming back at all. Is that because you're fabulous and you're fixing them, or is that because you're shocking and they don't want to see you again? So, I think technology is definitely useful there, because it eliminates the risk of any personal bias coming in. That's my opinion anyway. Yeah.
And I think too, sports and business is the same. If you're not measuring the right thing, it's pointless. So we were talking this week on measuring noise metrics. So if you're just measuring click-through rates on a website, what's that telling you? It's actually not giving you any in-depth information. Whereas if you measure how many people will book a demo with you, that's very different to how many people land on your website and move off very quickly. And you have to change those metrics, both the level of sport you're at and how your business is progressing. Because at each stage, you need to be measuring what matters. And I know, I don't know, have you guys done your finance module yet? I mean, I have this thing about, budgets. Like, budgets can be very limiting. And when you're in, as you'll know from business, what everybody does at the end of the year is they try to spend whatever's left in the budget, because they essentially get punished for sticking to the budget or being under budget. So everybody has this mad flurry of buying useless items that no one needs, just so they can keep that for the next year in case they need it again or they don't want to lose it. So by measuring performance or departmental performance in that way, you're measuring the wrong thing. And so it very much matters what you measure.
I think if I go back to the watch, for beginners, it's probably, you could argue, is better, because what a beginner won't know is they won't know what 6 minutes per kilometre feels like, and the coach will tell them, I want you to run at this pace, I want you to run at 7-minute K. But they won't necessarily have a notion, and what you get with beginners, and even me, look, I'm sure, I don't know what the lads are like, but when I take a break from training and I go back, I start trying to run as fast as I did before I took the break, and you can't do that. So I find the watch handy when I'm starting back up again, and I think for beginners who want to run, it's quite handy, because they can use it to learn how to pace themselves, not necessarily get fixated on it, but just learn, and then they start feeling, well, this is what it feels like to run at 6 minutes per kilometre, and get to know themselves that way. But I do think in the workplace, I mean, I'm not really big. The closest I've got to business is doing the MBA, and it's a big shock. Well, I don't know about business, but anyway, I'm learning. But what I always find, like I've one friend, let's say in particular, he owns a factory in Shannon, quite successful businessman. But I remember sitting with him one day, and he's talking about the people working in the factory. They get a 15-minute break in the morning, they get a half-an-hour break at lunchtime, and they're just go. And what you see in this kind of is productivity goes down in the afternoon. And I remember I said, Ted is his name, I said, Ted, do you ever think of maybe, say, rewarding people to do some exercise at lunchtime? Say, well, if you're willing to do a half an hour, just a walk, just something, if you're willing to do a half an hour walk, I'll give you an hour for lunch. And then get him, whether they use watches to measure, the stress levels or what, but see then what kind of productivity he gets in the afternoon, based on people being healthier and maybe using some form of device to measure their health status and relate it to productivity in the afternoon. I believe that they would. I believe he'd get a more productive afternoon by giving people some time to exercise, get out, get some fresh air, get away from the office. Because when you've only half an hour, you know, you go to the canteen, you eat, and you're back to work. It's not really a break.
Very good. Actually, a follow-on question from that. If I look, again, my crude knowledge of exercise and fitness, but I guess if you talk to each of you individually, one of the first rules or most basic foundations of exercise is about the rest days and taking downtime and recovery. And that's as important or more important than the actual training itself. And so from what I know, elite athletes are really good at knowing when to rest and for how long, and acknowledging the importance of rest, and that there's no medals for, you know, going out again after 2 or 3 hard sessions. But again, if we think of the purpose of this session is translating these principles back to work, it's very rare you see in the workplace someone saying, you know, well, we did a really hard day yesterday, great work yesterday, Monday, so we'll take today off. Or we only plan to work in 3 days. In fact, we all know about the huge debates over moving to a 4-day week and whether that's positive or negative. But even the idea of dropping one of those 5 days is a very controversial thing and splits opinion and so on. So I'm wondering, first of all, in your own work lives away from sport, do you practice this idea of the rest days, or at least recovery and downtime and so on, in the same way that you probably do in your sporting life?
I'm seeing more and more of the need to do that for across a few different reasons. Probably because I'm getting older, so I need to be really, really clever about recovery from a physical point of view, training, running, and I use the Garmin, and it does give me an indicator of, you know, you need to wait 24 hours for your next workout, and I heed it if it suits me, but not always. But I do. I take it half serious, you know, like. So if I was planning to do a run tomorrow, yeah, great. And if not, I'll question it. But it does give me at least an indication. But then from a point of view of working, you know, the last 2 years, like most of you, I've been working at home. I've been sitting down in the same room, working at home, you know, and the diminishing returns and even the physical implication, whether it's, you know, you're getting a bad back, you're getting sciatic, or you're getting too much, you know, you're getting too much stimulus, too much screen time, can't sleep properly. So I'm starting to see that some of the principles that certainly from running, where it's like little and often, like I used to get up early, do a core workout, do a lunchtime run, and then maybe do some stretching, or maybe a second run in the afternoon. And it's bite size, and there's loads of gaps, and you're all good. I'm seeing that now at work. Like I'll sit down, and I won't work for like 3 hours like that anymore, or like this, like you turn into a question mark. Won't do that anymore, because I'll go, no, I'm going to get up and I'm going to actually stretch out a bit. I'm going to do 10 minutes of yoga, or I'm going to just get off this digital, get off this screen. So I'm seeing a complete parallel, because, you know, this idea of being in your home office for 5 days a week, it requires, I think, a lot of respites, small respites to stay healthy and stay productive. Yeah.
So would any of the rest of you practice the recovery day, or at least recovery time?
Well, I think, go. Like, I think you need, discipline is kind of the thing you need to bring into your workplace as well. Like, I'm lucky, I'm on my feet all day for my job, but when most people coming into me are at a desk at home and working from home. But the biggest problem, more than what Peter was saying there with back pain and everything, I'm like, are you exercising? And they're like, oh God, I don't have time. And I'm like, there's always time. Like, I'm a big believer in up at 6 o'clock in the morning, get something done. Then it doesn't matter what happens in the afternoon, in the evening, because you can't plan. And if you have kids, you definitely can't plan what's going to happen, especially now, because if they've cough, you have to pick them up from school and they're done. So, like, I think you need to sit down on a Sunday, and as sad and all as it sounds, you need to plan your week. Like, you could ask me on a Sunday night, Jean, where would you be on Thursday at 3 o'clock, and I'll be able to tell you, because every hour is accounted for, but also so is my off time. And that could be going for a run, or that could be having a coffee and actually reading the paper. But I do think it is as important, not necessarily time off work. I think, like, work hard, enjoy your weekend, but I think sometimes your rest can be your sport as well. Like, so for me, going for a run I feel fabulous, where if I sat on the couch, I feel crap. So I think it depends on the individual, but I do think structure is key. And most people are like, I'm not a morning person. And I'm like, no one's a morning person. Like, I give classes at 6:30 in the morning. I don't bound down the stairs going, yes, can't wait to get out there to the Zoom camera. But I'm buzzing after it, and it's done. And half the world is still asleep. And if you run, or if you go for a walk at 6:30 in the morning, the air is cleaner. You'll get so much of a buzz out of it, a lot more than you will in the afternoon. And like, lunchtime is hard. Like I will put my hand up and say I'm addicted to running, and I love it, and it is my drug. But even I would find at lunchtime, I'm like, I'm kind of hungry. I've had 3 coffees, and my stomach's going to be upset if I go for a run now. So maybe I'll go later, but that won't happen. So it's the discipline of actually, you set your alarm, you get up, and you do what you planned that day, and you don't put it off. And then on Friday, you plan your weekend that you're going to have your rest day.
I'm terrible. I really am. You know, the environment I work in with the sport, it doesn't stop. Now, I know physio doesn't stop either, you know, but it doesn't, like, and no matter what, when I was working in professional sport, it absolutely never stopped. Like, my first 4 years at Munster Rugby, I had 3 weeks holidays. Not 3 each year, now 3 weeks in 4 years. Because it doesn't stop, you know. Players go on holidays, you're preparing for next season. Players going on holidays, some are behind, they're rehabbing, and now I'm here in the university, and it's probably the biggest fight I have at home with my wife. It's like, you're always on the phone. But I'm always on the phone because if the hurlers or the footballers or the rowers or somebody have a match on Saturday and one of them gets injured, well, I have to organise to get him physio. I can't leave it. So I'm really bad. I say all that as an excuse. I should be better. I absolutely should. But with regards to it's because we talked over the phone last year about this idea of, you know, in a work environment, could they do the same as the sport environment to get the returns? And just like for those of you that aren't into sport either, the key thing is, and Kieran is right, rest and recovery, right? There's about 8 principles of training, 8 key principles of training that for donkey's years, if you follow them, you'll pretty much get it right. And one of the key ones is rest and recovery. So when you exercise, in the simplest form, exercise is bad for you, right? Because exercise damages your body. But what you do is you eat well, you rest well, you recover well, you sleep well, you drink lots of water. You do all these things, and your body repairs, and then you get the benefit of the exercise. But the exercise itself is damaging you. And it's all these other things. So the rest and recovery, if you do not rest and recover properly, you won't get the adaptation you're looking for from a training stimulus. Okay? So it'd be interesting to see in a work environment. So if you work really hard on Monday, let's say on a production line, you work really hard on Monday, and Tuesday is a little bit easier. You go at it hard again on Wednesday. You take a half day Thursday and you go hard at it. Would you get more output? I don't know. It would be really interesting. But then, have you done Pomodoro method with the guys? Have you?
We did, yeah. They had the privilege.
Yeah. So, like my daughter does it with her school study. Now, she didn't get it from me. She was doing. This is how I had heard of it. Her school had them doing it.
Okay.
And there's a reason why in school classes are only like 40-45 minutes long, because that's all we can really focus for. We can't. But yet we're expected to sit in an office and sit there from, 8 in the morning until 1 o'clock with a 15-minute break and be productive. And then, have lunch from 1 to 1:30 and work from 1:30 till 5 o'clock and be productive. In my opinion, it's impossible.
So this class are master endurance athletes because we're nearly up to 2 hours.
Yeah.
Corporate athletes.
Speaking of that, we've 15 minutes left, so actually will we open it up for questions?
You keep bringing it back to business, start with the business context. So we're also going to look at the data, look at trends, and try and interpret some of these go out of filter, then you interact when something is happening. So, and a lot of you talk about this elite athletes. So personally, what's the opposite to elite? I'm absolutely opposite to elite. And as I've getting older, from a sport point of view, or just a little bit of exercise, I'm more and more prone to tweaks and aches and pains and all that. So I suppose my question to you guys is, do you think there'll be any, or is there any technology out there to help people predict or adjust our training or sports regime to prevent injuries or pull muscles or tweaks? Or is it just down to the fundamentals like you're talking about, that there's basic stretches and getting to know your body awareness? Or is it a technology thing?
I think for me, the first thing, if you are going to exercise and you need to be screened, you need to go and see your physio or a strength and conditioner that's qualified in a screening process, and get yourself screened, see if there's anything off kilter before you start anything. That's the key. Whether you're amateur or professional, no matter what, and Kieran, my opinion, some of the pros are actually the worst at looking after themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why they have coaches, because the coaches tell them what to do. And this is why they keep data, like the professional sports, they'll have an app, they'll all have an app on their on their phone. They'll key in some key metrics every day that will get fed to the coach. And then the coach will decide based on that whether you're training harder or easier today or whether we're adjusting. The athletes don't decide, because they're not capable of deciding in most cases. So it's to have some form of metric where you can make your own decisions, so not relying on a watch, but you get some key. Did I sleep well? Am I eating well? Am I getting my fluids every day? Some basic stuff. How do I feel? Do I feel energized? 5 or 6 questions, and you put them on in a little Excel spreadsheet. I'm sure you're all business people, you're all well capable. You do a little spreadsheet for yourself, and you see a graph, and you use the graph then to maybe help you. And if you're training hard and you put in like, oh, I'm achy today, I'm just, and then what you say is, well, tomorrow I'm not going to do that 20k run. I'm just going to do an easy 5k walk or something. You just gather some basic information. But the screening, and then I'm a little bit of do as I say, not as I do with a lot of things, right? Because the key for anyone as we get older, right? What people love is they love running, they love going to aerobics, they love all these things. The key actually to everything is some strength training. That is the key, right? Because that's the thing. As we get older, if we're not strong, and that's why we're going to fall and we're going to break a hip, or we're going to fall and we're going to break a wrist. And it's the foundation to everything. And if you have any little niggles, or if all you do, I don't know but if all you're doing is, let's say, running, and you're getting little niggles, there's every chance it's just because you don't have the muscular strength to deal with the training that you're doing. But the only way you'll find out is by doing a screen.
Yeah. I suppose that would be the big thing. Like running, generally people think it's the easiest in one way because it's convenient, but not everyone should be running. Okay, and like I love running, but like lots of people, I'm like, why are you running? And it's because they just got this idea. So strength training would be a key principle. To me, it's more important. You're going to change your muscle mass, you're going to prevent kind of atrophy, and you're going to protect your bones as well. And also, as you age, I would use the analogy with my patients that you're like a rusty hinge. You need to do little and often as opposed to loads, because it needs to be sustainable and it needs to be realistic for you. So don't kind of, like, I'm not a big fan of social media. I have an Instagram account because I have to for business, but I hate it. But I see things coming up and they're so false, and I'm looking at it going like, no one should be doing that. So you have to take everything you see with a pinch of salt, even the training plans that you might see. But strength, like, you cannot underestimate the importance of glute strength. And like, people get obsessed with core and they think six-pack. That's irrelevant to a physio. Like, six-pack generally is because of low body fat percentage. It's nothing to do with strength. Your fundamental basics like Pilates, floor-based Pilates. Like, I would have loads of people who can bench press crazy stuff, but get them to do a bridge, which is a simple Pilates move, and they can't do it. So no more than with work. Okay, and the business, bring it back to business. If you don't have your fundamental basics right, you're going to break down. Okay, it's the same way as if you go into work and you're going health-led on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're not doing anything else in the evening. That's not sustainable. So to plan and to have the basics right, and then to adapt it to suit you, would be kind of my thing anyway.
I just want to add, because for the female population, that strength training is probably more important than it is for the male population.
Yeah.
Because things like osteoporosis and bone density, it's only by doing weight-bearing activities that you will keep the density of your bones up. So going for a walk isn't going to do, unless it's a really fast walk where you're kind of struggling to talk. So strength training exercises, that type of, is really good for females to keep up bone density as we get older.
Kieran, you were asking about the rest day during the week. and you mentioned 8 principles. One thing that's always nagging on in my head is I see from a running perspective the benefit of seasonality, and I mean like over 12 months seasonality. And I think, the great runners don't do the same thing or don't have the same training load from one end of the year to the other because they're and if you look at nature, look at those trees out there, and they're going to lose their leaves, and they're going to kind of consolidate, regroup, and then they're going to explode in next spring and continue to grow like a company continues to grow at 20% a year or 15% a year. How does calendar seasonality come in? Because I believe that it would be great for people in work to have an element of that, but I don't think it's ever been cracked, or I don't think those two dots have been done. Is it one of the, seasonality one of the 8
No, well, you see, but sports are dictated by their calendar. You don't, when you're in a sport, you don't decide. The calendar of the sport decides for you. But I think it's interesting. I wonder, for example, if our rugby season was a summer season, not a winter season, would we see something better? Because you're more energised in the summer. In the winter it's dark, it's cold, it's miserable. I think it's an interesting but I would imagine, again for work. I mean, work is just let's say you start in September and you go all the way through to the next September and you take your holidays. There's no real change.
There's no variance.
No.
And we are, a lot. We're nature. We're cellular beings. We're closer to the trees than to the laptops.
Yeah, and I know, like within a business, obviously people will have a project. Like there'll be a project and we'll go for it. But then there's the next project. But you don't take downtime. Like athletes will train for the Olympics, and then they'll take a break because it's the end of the season. But you don't go to work and we just finished a big project. Now we're going to take 6 weeks off, and we're going to because the business has to keep going. I think that's interesting.
I'm thinking even in the winter, so that you're not going to work when it's dark and coming home when it's dark. If you condensed your work days, then it'd be
I know in Spain and some parts of the Nordics, they're looking at this now, and they're starting to have bigger days at certain times of the year and smaller days at other times of the year.
One important thing is, I guess, the technology we use in work certainly doesn't support that seasonality. So just even, a very silly example like the My Analytics thing that you might see for those of you using Outlook for email, it'll do nice analysis of how many emails you get outside work hours and how long it takes you to respond and all of this stuff. And some of it is mind-numbing or just messes with your head. But one of the interesting things is it works on a very simple 5-day week, 9 to 5. The idea that you might do a bit of variance, or you might have rest days or recovery days, or you have a flexible lifestyle with kids and whatever. It kind of just ignores all that or passes it away as just it's a very simple. It assumes you work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, except for bank holidays, and doesn't have anything that like that seasonality. So therefore, becomes fairly useless.
Mine is excellent. I do no work because I've got 7 different email accounts. So it's like, you worked 2% off yesterday. Like, excellent.
Any other questions? Any burning items that people are thinking of?
I just had a story of seeing sport interact with business in an amazing way. In 2010 South Africa hosted the World Cup soccer for the first time ever. It was a big transformation in the country. We were doing these internal campaigns for some companies, and there was a large FMCG company who had a problem with the packing of their trucks. It was always late, and so we were asked to do a short mural that was kicking around the World Cup, and I was part of the team of a few people that got involved in this project. And all it was really just to try and get people to take a certain amount of time. If they packed their truck within a certain amount of time, they could have a little court that was created and they could play some soccer. They got so excited about it that people were starting to finish their truck, go and unpack, help the other team unpack their trucks and get that out. And so they have people to play against. And we were all went up so much in this process that they actually won more contracts because the delivery took so much time and they became so reliable that people wanted to rather support them and they actually got more business out of it. And it was as simple as, it was such a fascinating dynamic to see evolve from something really, really simple and how that had an impact on the role of the team.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Or things that we might have missed?
Have you any advice on how to sustain ourselves for the next 2 years?
Oh. Well, I'm not finished yet, so.
Do you know, it's a long slog, but it's worth it. And it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. When you're out, the amount of my class, including myself, who've gone back to do something else afterwards, because you forget, it's like you blank how hard it was from your mind, and you're like, that was the best couple of years of my life, let's go again. But yeah, just rest when you can. Don't put yourself under too much pressure. You know, it's really hard when you're juggling work and family and friends, and put up whatever you need to make sure you stay healthy and well. Because if you drive yourself, like with the sports, if you push yourself too hard for 2 years, you'll burn out. So you just need to be, you know, if you have to say no to going for a coffee for someone, you know, your friends will understand, you know, I don't have the time for it. It's just 2 years. I will be back. You know, I'll meet you when I can, but just don't put yourself under too much pressure to do everything you did before you took on the MBA. It just gets too much.
And I think also as well, with, you know, good is good enough. You know, you know, it's not like, you know, it's not like leaving cert you're looking for points. It's not like, you know, you're not necessarily looking, you know, you personally you might want a 1-1 and everything, but all anyone will see is an MBA on your beside your name. You know, so if you're under pressure, I think good is good enough. You know, because that's what's going to get you through. You don't want to look for the perfect mark in your assignment and end up in the ground and be no good for the next assignment and failing it because you've burnt yourself out.
May I ask you for your advice? When is the best time to run in the morning or in the evening? I'm asking because in the past, when I was a student in high school, I was doing athletics, 200 meters. But my question is it a matter of personal internal clock, or there's some...
I would think to run, like, yeah, your personal internal clock. I think if you were trying to go out and do something like a hard session, I would think not first thing in the morning, because you need your body literally time, like, to actually warm up and to not be stiff and that. But if it's just to go for a run, it would be personal decision. Like me personally, I would love to be able to run every morning at 6 o'clock. But if you asked me to go and do a hard session at 6 o'clock in the morning, I would do it, but I wouldn't reach the targets that I had aimed for. And I would possibly have a niggly back later on in the day as well.
The other concern I have is the wet weather here in
You've got 2 years to get used to it.
Yes, apparently I need to have appropriate clothes.
But the most important thing is, like, you know, from the clothes point of view, is if you're going to get wet, you're going to get wet. So the less clothes on, possibly the better. Don't get cold. Yeah, have a hat, have a gilet jacket, and like I'd be out in shorts and t-shirts with a gilet jacket and a hat and gloves once my head and my hands are warm, and good runners, because, you know, there's nothing worse than wet leggings stuck to you and long sleeve top, like that's horrendous, and like you'll get chaffing and everything. So I think keep it simple. I'm a big believer in basics, nothing too fancy, and that's it.
I would say this time of year here, lunchtime is usually the kindest weather, and also if you do your run just before a meal, that's good, because it's part of the recovery, and if you don't eat within a half an hour, it might be part of the reason why you're not
buzzing,
feeling faster.
That's really
better.
Soul traders.
But I'd agree. I think, like, I hate the morning. My wife is up most mornings every week doing yoga or going for a run. I have 2 kids that swim at 5:30 in the morning, so they're up at 5 o'clock. And mostly my wife will bring them because she likes doing her run. I hate that, as probably too much time as a rower where we were up early in the mornings. But I'd agree, if you want to get a really good day, run in the morning, right? But if you want to be fast,
yeah.
And if you want to be, if you said like 200, 400, kind of 200. Okay, so if you want to be fast, then you're talking about sometime in the middle of the day, because what you want, in order to be fast, your central nervous system needs to be very, very alert and very awake. And it's not in the morning, so it's kind of mid-morning into lunchtime, I think, there is research out there that will show, but it's in and around that time. And then in the evening, your central nervous system starts to go sleep again. So it's in the middle of the day when your central nervous system is at its highest level of excitement, is when you want to do fast sprinting. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
On that note, we've got to 5 o'clock. I kept the technology thing as a core focus as long as I could, but we've now drifted into the Galway weather, so I think now is the time to call it a day. So first of all, thanks for all the discussion and the questions, and in particular thanks to Jane Ann, Yvonne, Peter and Fergal for a really nice panel, and thanks again for giving their time. They're all busy working or training, as you can imagine, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come in.